If you've been watching the channel for a while, you might remember that a few years ago I built this custom router table into the wing of my table saw. It was actually one of the first workshop upgrades I ever did, and it's been heavily used ever since. You've probably seen it in plenty of build videos, especially when I'm template routing with the help of my laser. It was a very budget-friendly project. I think I spent maybe $100 on materials, and that even included the very basic router lift that I picked up off from Wish or eBay. I can't remember which one it is now. Fast forward a few years though, the whole setup is starting to show its age. The router lift mechanism is beginning to fail, which honestly isn't that surprising given how much I've used it. It can't hold its weight anymore and slowly winds itself down while I'm routing, meaning I've got to keep a constant eye on it. The homemade router plate also needs regular adjustment. The grub screws I've been using tend to back themselves out from vibration, causing frequent stops as material catches on the edge. But the biggest issue is probably the fence. It's actually the original one from my old router table. I never updated it, and while it still works most of the time, it's not really that well designed. You may have also noticed recently that I've been getting into 3D printing, mainly designing jigs and accessories for the workshop. The most recent being my joinery sled, which has given me a lot of confidence to go a bit bigger and bolder with my router table fence. And that's why in today's video, I'm going to be upgrading my router table for the second time. I'm going to be installing a new router lift, adding some basic but much needed interface and safety features, but most importantly, I'm taking on my most ambitious self-design challenge yet. Designing a fully adjustable router table fence that features independent left and right adjustments, a main fence adjustment, as well as some other cool features. Will this new fence be a success? Well, I guess we'll find out. When it comes to router lifts for trim routers, there really aren't a lot of high-end options out there. There are plenty of budget ones like the one that I originally used, but trying to find something with a bit more premium turned out to be a bit of a challenge. Eventually I settled on this lift from Takata, which is designed for trim routers. I paid 325 Australian dollars for it, but I later found out that the exact same model is sold under a whole bunch of different brand names. The only difference was the logo that's on the plate. And after doing some more digging, I found the exact same model on the website Banggood for $100 less, so 250 Australian dollars, and that included free shipping. So if you're thinking about picking one up, my advice is shop around, find the cheapest version of this lift you can. They're all the same, just with different branding. I'll link to the one that I bought, but I'll also link to the Banggood version that I found that was significantly cheaper. And of course, we do need to do a bit of a side-by-side comparison between the two lifts. Yep, just a tiny bit of difference. So, the only thing left is to remove the old top and see what we have to work with here. Now you might be asking, Anthony, why are you still using a trim router motor? Why not upgrade to a proper router? Well, the truth is, for the kind of work I do right now, a basic trim router still gets the job done. None of the issues that I highlighted earlier have anything to really do about the performance, and if I ever decide to step up to a full-size router, I'll probably build a dedicated table for it anyway. So for now, I'm saving a few bucks and sticking with what I've got. Okay, with the top off we can assess the frame and it looks pretty much fine. Don't see any major issues, it's still flat level. We do have a little tiny bit of adjustment we'll need to make because we've got a little bit of sag here, but that's easy enough to do. We'll just loosen up some of these bolts, readjust, and shim it back up. So that looks fine. Yeah, I think we're looking at, I don't think we have to replace this. So if I look at the size of our router lift, which is a little bit bigger than the other one, it's still, ironically, fits into the same space that I made with the original box. So that's turned out quite good. I don't know whether or not I'll need to make adjustments for the plate height to keep it flush, because it does come with its own little plates here. So we may need to rejig this part at least, so maybe take these out and install those plates instead. But overall, I don't think there's a lot of modification that we're going to need to do, so that's good news. So I think what we really need to then focus on is doing some adjustments, but then also putting a new top on, so cutting a new top, and I guess that those are next steps. Before I cut the top, I just want to remove these two side pieces that I mentioned earlier. I think it would be better to get them out of the way now rather than trying to do it later. The enclosure is just a simple box held in with 3 screws. While normally it would be difficult to get a driver into this space, these right-angled adapters are really perfect for this kind of job. If you don't have one, do yourself a favor and put it on your Christmas list, because you'll find it will get you out of so many jams. And with those brackets removed, I can reinstall the dust collection box. So to replace the form ply top, I'm going to be very controversial and replace it with some more form ply. This bit is my last big bit of form ply, so I'm probably going to need to stock up at some stage, but this stuff is getting a bit pricey these days. Despite that, it's still, in my opinion, one of the most versatile materials. I've used it all over the workshop and even inside my house with a few furniture projects. To break the ply down, I'll first cut it with the track saw. I'm really loving the track saw, but I'm still on the lookout for a right angle adapter that's going to allow me to line it up for square cuts. I'm not sure if there are any good ones available for the Bosch track, but let me know in the comments if you know a good one that you've seen. Checking the fit, we have a pretty good one. I'll need to put some chamfers or a chamfer on the sides to avoid sharp edges and chipping the form ply top, but I'll do that later. I'm going to mark out where I need to cut out for the recess for the router table. The lift came with a template, but I need to make sure it's in the right spot in relation to the enclosure. I'll take some inside measurements and then transfer those to the top and set out where I need to cut out the template. Now before you ask, yes, I can see the pencil marks on the form ply, but yes, I really need to get myself a white pencil. I've never seen a mechanical pencil or a fine tipped pencil that has a white lead, but if there is one, let me know. But for now this will do, and we're ready to cut out our template. Using a Forstner bit, I'll drill out the corners so that I've got room to cut out the bulk of the material using my jigsaw. After a quick wipe down, I can attach the included template and install the flush trim bit that came with the kit into my trim router. It's not the greatest bit, it's a straight bit blade, but the fact it's included is a nice touch. The old Ryobi trim router is really starting to struggle these days. You can really hear it in its performance, and given my struggles with the joinery sled build, I really need to retire this old gal. So Bosch, if you're listening, I'm very open to trying out one of your palm routers. So as I mentioned before, there are no instructions. So in terms of installation, I'm kind of winging it a little bit. These corner brackets, though, seem pretty obvious. They're going to mount in the corner, and the router lift is going to mount to it, as well as providing a platform for adjusting the level of the router plate surface. And now the moment I've been waiting for, which is to see how accurate the template is by dropping in the router lift. It's a very snug fit, but a fit nevertheless, and I'm pretty happy with the accuracy that we were able to achieve here. As you can see, we'll need to add the leveling screws to the support brackets so that we can flush the router plate with the top of the router table. It was at this point that I realised we had a bit of a problem. The thickness of the top isn't enough to allow sufficient space for the leveling screws to work. I probably should have seen this coming, but I think there is a very simple solution to this. So firing up the Falcon 2 Pro, I whipped up a bracket in Lightburn to match the bracket. This actually turned out to be quite easy to do since the bracket actually had the radius dimension printed on it. This only took about 10 minutes from design to cut, and it's honestly one of the reasons I love having a laser in the shop. I actually have a new laser on the way that I'm really excited about and can't wait to share with you in a future video, so stay tuned for that. Those spacers did the job. They lifted the plate up enough that we now have some room to flush it with the top of the router table. I installed some bog standard T-track to allow me to attach and secure my router fence in place when I'm using it. To cut out the groove, I just created a template using some scrap form ply and routed it out using my cordless router. And because the router bit is, well, round, we do need to square up the corners for the T-track. And yes, that does mean me using a chisel. One of the very few and rare occasions you'll see me using one. Because the T-track will bump up against my table saw wing, I'm cutting off just the top of the T-track so that I can slide in T-bolts or custom adapters. And now the router goes back in. And we secure it with a single nylon threaded bolt. And with the router secured, we can put the top back in. The T-track can now go in. And before I forget, I'll add a quick chamfer to the sides just to break the edges and to actually match the profile of the wings on my table saw. I added the screws for the T-track, and the position of the T-track is deliberately over some of the sections of the frame, so these screws are going through the T-track, through the top, and actually into the frame for a bit of extra strength. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that a very important feature that I didn't have with the old router table was a safety cutoff switch. While I'm very thankful that I've not had any incidents, you really only have to ask my dad, who is missing the top of his thumb, what happens when a body part comes in contact with a router. I sourced this safety switch online. It has standard plugs, so there's no need to rewire anything, just plug and play. It wasn't cheap, but you can't really put a price on safety, so it's obviously worth it. I'll link to the one that I bought in the description below if you need to add one to your shop. So with that, the router table upgrade is now complete. But before we delve into the router table fence, there is something I need your help on. The Australian maker community is full of incredible, talented individuals. It's a community built on collaboration, mateship, and a shared passion to lift each other up through the powerful act of making and sharing. One of those champions, Phil, known to many of us as Gradually Wizardly, has been doing it tough lately. About a year ago, Phil was diagnosed with cancer, something that has touched many of our lives, either directly or through someone we care about. True to form, Phil has faced this with his humour, his strength, and his unmistakable personality. He's been openly sharing his journey, not just with honesty and vulnerability, but with a mission.
If you are over 50, have an awkward conversation with your doctor about your butt. get screened. It's easy, it's fast, and it is absolutely stupid not to if you have anybody in your life that you love or that loves you.
But as we know, cancer doesn't just test your body, it also tests your spirits and places a huge financial burden and toll on your family. In response and support to Phil's battle, one of our community champions, Mark Dainsy, along with a group of other amazing Aussie makers, have started producing and selling, in support of Phil, some upsized squares that I'm sure you've seen all over social media. In support of this campaign, and as a bit of a laugh, I made this, what I call the big square. We'll be auctioning off this big square. So right now on my website, there is an auction that's currently live where you can go and bid on this one-of-a-kind item in support of Phil. So if you would like to take home this one-of-a-kind item, then I strongly urge you to visit my page on my website. I'll have a link in the description below. Or if you'd like to contribute or donate to the cause, there are a bunch of ways you can contribute. Maybe buy yourself one of the big squares or even shout Phil a coffee on a donation page that's on Mark's website. So again, I'll have details in the description below. Please consider contributing and maybe even checking out Phil's YouTube page. There's a whole bunch of really cool stuff on there. He's constantly still posting and active on social media, so I encourage you to go check all of that out. Thanks to everyone who's already contributed, and maybe I'll be sending this out to you very shortly. It's finally time to talk router table fence. So I'm going to walk you through my design, talk about some of the components, how they're designed and how they work, and then finally we'll take this for a spin to see, well, does it work? So first things first, let's talk about the router table base, and it's made from form ply.
I was not expecting that.
Now, if you're going to be building one for yourself, you don't have to use form ply. You could easily substitute that with MDF, substitute it with some other plywood, or any material that's flat, as long as it's flat. So this particular base is one that I hand cut. I used a technique that you've seen me do a million times on the channel, which is to take a template that I've cut out on the laser, lay that on top of the form ply, and then using a pattern bit on the router table, cut out around that template for my final shape. But as this project progressed and I needed to make multiple testing and prototype bases as I kept making slight adjustments to hole positions, things like that, it became apparent that constantly making and manually doing them was taking too much time. So at that point, I reached out to my good friend Trent Walsh at Trent Walsh Woodworks, who is a very talented Australian maker, and I do suggest following him on Instagram. I'll leave a link to his account below in the description. But I reached out to him and asked him if he could help me out with cutting out some bases on his CNC. And of course, being the wonderful individual he is, he jumped at the chance to collaborate on this. So after a couple of back and forths with him with some different designs, some drawings that I'd made, and I sent him some CAD files, he came back with a whole bunch of prototype bases, all machined on his CNC, all millimetered perfect. So it really saved me a whole heap of time and effort in terms of making a whole bunch of these bases for testing. So a huge thank you to Trent. I would not have been able to finish this project if it hadn't been for him. So like I said, go ahead and follow him on Instagram. He's well worth a follow because he's a wonderful straight maker. So obviously the main feature of our fence is going to be the micro adjustment mechanisms that exist on the right-hand side. And obviously we've got some on the left-hand side. Now those mechanisms are identical. So if you're printing this, you print this identical, you print it in 2 sets and they will suit both the left and right. There's no differentiation between the two. Now the mechanism does look complex, but once we break it down into the individual components, you'll see that it's actually quite a simple design. So each side is made up of a base. So a very simple base, very easy to print, that has some M8 bolts located in a strategic position, which we'll see why in a second. And this base just simply bolts down to 4 locational points on the base, on the form ply base. From here, we can have our sliding base, which is the component which allows the fence or the aluminium extrusion here to be mounted directly to it. So it will be mounted on this side. We've got some adapter holes here to allow those to be mounted. So as you can see, like it's mounted here. And the idea is pretty simple. With the adjustment screw or adjustment cog here, as we push in and out, the fence can move forward and the fence can move back. So we have some locking bolts as well. Again, files to be able to 3D print these will be included. And these obviously allow us to lock the fence in place once we've made an adjustment. So once that's adjusted, we dial in our fit, we can then lock it in and the fence will not move. So that's basically how this mechanism works. It actually repeats how the mechanism works for the rear one, which I'll talk about in a second. But once we break it down, you can see that the idea is actually quite simple. It's just a simple M8 bolt that has an M8 nut. And then as we make adjustments to that nut by turning the adjustment wheel, we are moving the fence in and out. So pretty simple. The original design concept only called for independent micro adjustment on the left and right side fence. There was no initial thought to include any sort of universal adjustment that moved both sides of the fence at the same time. But as testing progressed, it became really obvious really quickly that some sort of mechanism to allow me to adjust both sides of the fence simultaneously was really going to be needed. I envisioned a whole bunch of scenarios like making dados or grooves that might require me to make small adjustments to the fence as a whole. And I really didn't want to be trying to make those independent adjustments separately on both sides of the fence. It makes a lot more sense to do it all at one go. So that's why we have this third micro adjustment mechanism here at the back. It again works the same way as the others, a simple M8 threaded bolt, along with an M8 nut that is embedded into a wheel adjustment mechanism. This is all bolted to a rear base, which is again fixed in place using T-track and allows me to loosen the front fence to allow that micro adjustment. So with these bolts here loosened, we can adjust the fence as a whole. Now you may have also noticed that I've extended the T-track on the table, so it now extends from the middle all the way to the edge of the table. And the reason I have done this is because underneath, I have added these tracks or these runners that will allow the fence to sit and glide across the table within the T-track here. And this is just to help keep the fence parallel to the router bit so that it won't skew or twist. So it was important to extend the T-track further to allow this runner to be a lot longer so it could actually achieve that. Well, that basically covers it. The last thing I'll quickly talk about is the dust hood cover. So nothing overtly complex. Obviously, this is the overhead dust collection. I have designed it with this removable adapter here. So this is to suit my particular overhead dust collection, which is my shop vac, and there's obviously a video that describes this particular setup, but very handy, and this suits my particular shop vac, so I can just plug it in. If you are downloading the plans for this, or I should say the digital files for this, you can of course modify this to suit whatever particular dust extraction you're going to use. So the only thing left now is to take this for a spin. So we're going to do some tests and find out how accurate the fence is, and more importantly, can I potentially use this instead of my jointer? So for this first initial test, I'm just going to be using my basic templating bit that I already have here in the router. While this bit is very small, it is quite tall, so I'm going to test how it might handle a piece that only needs a little bit of jointing. To set up this cut, I'm going to align the left and right fence first to each other. There are marking measurements on my router plate that can help me align the left and right so they are about close to even, and then I can make small adjustments by using a piece of wood that I know is a straight edge and just running it across the face to make sure that they line up. Each side of the fence is fully adjustable, so I'm going to close up the face to each side and get snug up near the router bit. Now the way a jointer works is by having two faces that are coplanar within themselves, but the in feed being slightly lower than the out feed. I'll first line up the two faces with the bearing on the router bit first using a straight edge, and then adjust only slightly the right hand fence to be slightly inside the left hand side. So the test piece we're using is just a bit of old pine that came off some furniture. It's already pretty straight, but it needs to be cleaned up properly. Being a smaller bit we're using here, we can't take big passes on this, but this should at least give us a good baseline idea of how the process works, and it should give us a gauge if this is going to work with bigger bits. We've effectively turned our router into a jointer. The top of the table turns into our guiding edge, and the router table fence into our in and out feed. And the net result is something that's very straight when we compare it to our straight edge. I repeated this test with a slightly bigger bit, using the same technique and this time being able to take a much deeper cut. And of course, we have to check for square. Now for the second test, I wanted to check for making accurate grooves or datas with smaller router bits. This means that I'll need to make an adjustment to the whole fence, allow me to test the rear adjustment mechanism. So this is a 16mm wide bit, and I'm going to try and cut a slot into the test piece that will accommodate a piece of form ply, which is 17mm wide. This means we're going to need to make a 1mm adjustment to the whole fence to make this groove work. So as you can see, we're about 1mm out, so we're going to have to adjust the fence. So another way we can adjust the fence forward by a specific amount is to use shims. So I've got my cabinet shims that I 3D printed a while ago, and you can buy these from my website. But what we can do is when we loosen the front fence, or the front base I should say, when we extend it out, we can then insert some shims into the slot and then back that back in. And we know that the fence is now moved forward by the thickness of the shim. So after making our adjustment, I can run the second pass and hopefully we should have a net result of a 17mm groove. The end result is not bad. I had a little tiny bit of chatter on the end of the cut, but that's mostly the fault of the bit being a bit old and frankly a bit blunt. But overall, the rear adjustment mechanism worked exactly how we'd hoped. So does that mean my router table is going to be replacing my jointer? And the answer to that is absolutely no! This whole journey was never really about trying to replace my jointer. It was really just about giving myself more options should the need arise. More importantly, this project was really about testing myself. Could I design and build something that was functional and worked and practical? Now, it's obviously not a perfect design. I think there's lots of improvements that I can make in terms of efficiency and space usage, and maybe making some of the components a little bit smaller. I actually think that this fence would really shine on a dedicated router table with a much beefier motor. Having a bigger motor should mean that you have access to bigger and better bits, which should expand the amount of options that are available in terms of potentially using this like a jointer. That's something I may explore in the near future, but I think that's a mission and a story for another day. If you're interested in printing your own parts to make your own version, then I'm going to have 3D files available on my website for purchase. I'm also for the first time opening up print on demand. So if you're interested in any of the components here to be printed for you, because you don't have access to a 3D printer or a friend who has a 3D printer, then again, check out my website and you can order pre-printed and pre-assembled components for making your own router table fence. Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to my channel members, especially my newest channel members, Gundamar, Daryl, and Roger. A big thank you for your support and welcome to the Barber's Paddock. Just a reminder, if you can, support Phil's cause. Again, links are in the description below. Thank you for your generosity and I will see you on the next one.